Hi everybody, this is part 2 of our video that we were talking about before for Monday, January 4th, our world history video. We were discussing the origin of the Arab people. They trace, as I had mentioned, as you can see here on the screen, I should say here on the screen. I keep pointing to the screen, but you can't see what I'm pointing to, so I should use my mouse. Arab people for a long time traced their lineage back to Abraham, but through Ishmael. Jewish people traced their lineage back to Abraham through Isaac, the son of the promise. Arabs traced their lineage back to Abraham through Ishmael. And we discussed it was a very it's kind of a sad story if you read it. Then that like the tough life that Ishmael and Hagar had to go through, and Ishmael had to kind of fight for everything he got, and he was dealt a really tough hand in that, like, he had to really live in a very difficult environment and everything. But again, it was all because of Abraham and Sarah's unbelief. If they had just believed God and waited for God, then Ishmael would not have been alive, but also it would not have caused all those problems. You know, we see so often when people try to go in their own strength in the Bible, it ends up causing a lot of issues. Like Jacob and Esau. When Jacob was on his own, God tried to come to him and be like, "I want to be your God," and Jacob was like, "Nah, I'm all set." And he went and tried to, by his own hand, get Rachel to be a wife, and his uncle tricked him into taking Leah instead, and so he ended up having two wives, and Leah and Rachel, and they didn't hate one another, but they really had a lot of problems. And when you try to go through stuff in your own strength and unbelief without God's guidance, it can cause a lot of problems. And we see this is the main conflict between Arabs in the area and Jews in the area. So as I left off with, a lot of the Arabs in the in the Old Testament times felt like Ishmael should have the birthright instead of Isaac, because he was born first. And they say he was born first, he should have the birthright, but instead it went to Isaac. As you can imagine, a lot of jealousy there, and that has a lot of the origins of the fights in the Bible with different people were traced back to this. So, interestingly, a lot of Arabs even co-opted the story of Abraham's sacrifice. Remember when he brought Isaac up to the mountain and was about to sacrifice Isaac, and God said, "Stop! Good job. You have shown that you're that you have faith and this and that." And they've co-opted that story. A lot of the Arab peoples in that time co-opted the story to be Ishmael instead of Isaac, and so. How they've changed the Bible, that's number 3 on your notes. They changed the Bible, and this is not all Arabs, but this is some Arabs in the ancient times changed the Bible to make it seem like, or change the stories in the Bible. They didn't really change the Bible because they didn't have the Bible, but they changed the stories around from the Bible to be that Ishmael was the one on the mountain, not Isaac. So we look at, was it Isaac, was it Ishmael? Well, obviously the Hebrew Bible says Isaac, very clear, very plain. The Hebrew Old Testament is very clear. So from their perspective, and obviously they would have reason to say it was Isaac. They have a bias, if you will, so they're not like a neutral source, but every single Hebrew source said it was Isaac. It was definitely Isaac, 100% Isaac, it was definitely Isaac. But when we look at the Arab writings, a lot of the earliest writings just talk about Abraham sacrificing a son. They just say that he brought a son up to the mountain to sacrifice him. And the earliest ones, the very first ones, do not specify. And what to do with it, the best way to go through things is to look at the earliest stuff. A lot of people, when we look at the Bible, there's different scrolls from the Bible, and a lot of people have different ideas of what you should look for. There are two different texts that people tend to go to, and both of them have their merits. One of them there's less of the scrolls, but they're earlier dated. The other ones, there's a lot more of the scrolls, but they're later dated, and so a lot of people like the later dates because there's a lot of them, and you can see consistency through all these scrolls, the translations. But the problem with that thinking is, I mean, if you were to write a note, and I were to write my own version of your note, and then Mrs. Hanley were to write her version of my version of your note, and then photocopy it 100 times, you could say, oh, look at Mrs. Hanley's version of the note. I have 100 copies versus you only have one copy of the original note. So I have 100 copies of this copy of a copy. And so obviously I'm right because I have more of them. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You want to go to the original. And so in the Arab writings, the earliest Arab writings were all saying that some son of Abraham was brought up to be sacrificed. They didn't specify who it was, just that a son was sacrificed. Well, the Bible, as I mentioned, has the same story and clearly states it was Isaac. There's no debate on the Jewish side who the sacrificed child is. The debate is on the Arab side. And once people start talking about Ishmael, a little bit later on, once time passes, some of the Arab writers, some of the early Arab writers in the Old Testament times, 1000, 1500, 2000 BC, they start talking about it as as Ishmael instead. The earliest writers didn't specify, and then as time went on, some of them, and it's not even all of them, some of them said it was Ishmael who was sacrificed, who was about to be sacrificed, and about half said it was Isaac. And so when you have, it's called like a corroboration. When you have, you look at how reliable a source is. If I am, for instance, I'll use politics for a second. If I'm looking for a reliable source about, let's say, Donald Trump, it's probably not beneficial to go for somebody like Donald Trump's son or daughter. It's probably not a reliable source, just like Joe Biden's children are not a reliable source necessarily for what he's like, because they have bias. You always should look at both sides of the issue and try to see where they meet in the middle, right? So here on the Jewish side, everybody says it was Isaac. On the Arab side, about half say Isaac, half say Ishmael. And on the Arab side, they have a lot of reason to want it to be Ishmael. So the very fact that about half of them say it was Isaac means it's a lot more weight to Isaac being the one. The ones that had said it was Ishmael don't actually have anything to back it up, but they claim the Jewish story of Isaac is just because of jealousy by the Hebrews. Essentially, they accuse the Hebrews of just being jealous of them. They don't really have evidence or anything. They just say it was Ishmael and the Hebrews stole it from us. And so again, I just think that Isaac being the the one from Abraham's sons, it just makes more sense. It's just more reliable. The Arab descendants of Ishmael always hated the Hebrews. You can see that there'll be a jealousy there. Remember, Ishmael was cast out and almost died, and he probably retained some of that anger. Hagar was probably angry at Sarah. I mean, you can see the way, if you go back and read in like Genesis 15 and 16, you can kind of see the attitude that Hagar had. She was just a servant. Then all of a sudden, she became essentially Abraham's wife when he got her pregnant. And she kind of had this attitude of like, I don't have to listen to you. I'm just as good as you are now. I'm just as high as you are. I'm just as important as you are. And I might even be better because I'm carrying his child. And so Sarah was like, wait a minute, you were just a servant. Now you're acting like you're better than me? And so you can kind of see the jealousy started even there with Hagar. And so the Arab descendants of Ishmael did not like the Hebrews and had plenty of reason to not be truthful. All right, let's look at, we have about 5 minutes left, so let's look at daily life of Arab people. And by the way, this is going to be a much shorter chapter. You'll see, I guess, I might even finish it in like the next 2 weeks or so, but a lot shorter of a chapter, this one and the next one. Daily life. Okay, so Arabs descended from Ishmael were originally nomadic people. A lot of people around this time were nomadic, moving from place to place, following their pack animals. And so the Arabs were nomadic people who raised sheep and goats. But once they domesticated the camel, they were able to expand into the desert. So on number 4 there you can put that the camel was a huge technological advancement for them. They allowed them to expand out throughout the desert. Instead of just kind of moving from place to place, they could root down and be in a town, and they could send somebody on a camel to travel long distances over dry areas and then bring supplies back. So the camel was a huge technological advancement, allowed them to be able to travel over long distances. And from this arose the Bedouin style of life. What Bedouins are, it's like the word nomad is a very general term. It can be anybody that moves from place to place. Bedouins are specifically Arab nomads who lived in especially dry areas like the desert, and they relied heavily on camels. So a Bedouin is a specific type of nomad. You know, you had other nomads we've talked about, like Indo-Europeans were generally nomads. That could be like the Mongolian people and people from northern China. But Bedouins are specifically Arab nomads that use camels. And the camels allow them to have trade routes through desert regions with small towns along the way. And so because of the use of camels, they end up starting to use little towns along this path. If they're trying to get from here to here, oh, I'm going to make sure I'm here to here. Okay, they might have like a little town here, a little town here, a little town here, a little along the path, so that the people riding on camels can just kind of stop in. It's almost like the idea of like the Wild West in America, where you had these like trading posts, where you know you have like a little tiny town where people have 3 buildings in the town. They have a trading post in it, and they have like one sheriff, and that's about it. Maybe one saloon or something, and people just kind of pass through. It's kind of like what it was, and these towns arose because it was along trading routes, and they were able to just kind of stop in, get some more supplies, and then leave again. So they had the development of the camel. They also had development of irrigation, and allowed them to develop farms in the southern Arabian Peninsula and along the Red Sea. So along that western coast, along the Red Sea, and in the very, very south, that's where the Arabs started to settle. They were not along the Persian Gulf. They were more along the western side, like on the Africa side. And each tribe was ruled by a guy called a sheikh. That's what that says. S-H-E-I-K-H. Sheikh. Looks like sheikh. But so a sheikh. What a sheikh is a tribal leader of an Arab group. I don't know if you can see. It says chosen by a council of elders. So essentially it's what you think of as like a chief, a tribal chief. But specifically for Arab people. So the sheikh, it's still a term used today for like a family leader or some kind of leader in government. But that's what it originally was, is just a tribal leader, usually a family leader. 2 minutes left. Why don't I stop here? We'll get into religion tomorrow. So I'm going to have homework for you. I'm going to have homework for you. Make sure you do the homework on LMS. Hopefully you guys have all printed out the notes. You should be having filled out 1 through 5 on here. And hopefully I'll see you soon. I don't know if I'm going to be in for a couple of weeks or whatever, but hopefully I'll see you soon. See you guys later.